So a huge welcome again to Anupriya. We are excited to hear you talk.
Okay. I'm just setting up my Zoom situation. Okay. Everything is fine in my small screen. Okay, cool. Thank you so much. And I'm bummed that I'm not there due to a health situation at the very last moment. But I was really looking forward to be there in person, and I'm feeling a major FOMO, but I'll try my best to enjoy this. Okay. So I'll be talking about designing health technologies and living ecologies. And I think Blue's talk actually gave you a sense of like what does tracking ecologies look like when she mentioned that taking an holistic approach. More or less, that's what I'll be talking about, but more on socio-ecological aspect. But before I move forward, I would quickly like to position myself so you would understand from where I'm coming. I'm a postdoc researcher. I did my PhD in India. And I identify myself more as like interaction design researcher. And I work at the intersection of HCI, interaction design, health equity, ecologies, gender, and taboos. And in terms of skill set, I use qualitative and design approaches, basically participatory design methods, to study communities and basically how do they engage with these menstrual technologies to navigate their menstrual experiences. So let me start by setting the context where I have been working for past 10 years now. So menstruation is a natural phenomena, yet for millions around the world, including India, where I have been working, it remains shrouded in stigma, silence, shame, and misinformation. Menstrual experiences, often perceived as intimate and personal, are shaped by the society, making them deeply political. It is a site of control, power, and resistance. In India, where I am born and brought up, and have spent decade of my life working on this subject, menstruation is shaped by a unique coexistence of sacredness and the impurity. We have temples, festivals celebrating menstrual cycles of deities, and menarche, which is the first period, is marked as a coming of age event in many regions. Yet, these celebrations often involve seclusion, restricted diets, and ritual purification. Even though there are rituals that honor menstruation, but real, open, everyday conversation about menstruation are still very rare, which contributes to fear, low self esteem, and embarrassment among menstruators, which in extreme situations and sadly lead to loss of their lives. And these are the headlines from past 2 years. So, as an interaction design researcher, I have spent 10 years investigating how technology can play a role in addressing cultural taboos and systemic barriers towards supporting menstrual journeys. And for doing that, what I have done is like I have conducted multiple qualitative and design studies among India's middle class population in Delhi, where I have worked with cisgender women and prominent stakeholders in their surroundings to study multiple use cases of menstrual technologies. I have focused on how people are using these technologies for cultivating menstrual literacy, for supporting menstrual mobilities, and menstrual tracking. More recently, like my recent paper focuses on menstrual ecologies, which I'll talk about it later in this presentation. I want to take a moment to also do some publicity, self-publicity here, taking space, that this research was awarded Sikkai Dissertation Award in 2025. And why it is important, not personally, but why it is important for the kind of work we do, that this kind of work is really important and appreciated. So in case if you feel that there is lack of funding opportunities, people might not appreciate what you're doing because it's a social topic, working on women's body. I think receiving this kind of award was a validation for me because I struggled with that kind of imposter syndrome for 8 years of my PhD. So putting that out there for all the people sitting in the audience. But at the same time, I want to pause and ask you, aren't you curious, like why Anupriya has spent 10 years working in the field, but still there are just like handful of publications, right? Which we refer to as tangible academic outcomes, which are very important to get a job these days. I'll tell you why. Because researching on a conversational taboo topic in a sensitive cultural context entails a lot of invisible care work, which takes multiple years, and a lot of invisible emotional care labor. I have learned that the research journey itself and the experiment designs which we do as researchers are an intervention in themselves. And when you try to create an impact at the grassroots with the people you are talking or participants you are engaging, it's just not about collecting data. It's also about how you collect that data, how you speak to them, the kind of space you nurture to collect that data when it is a conversational taboo topic, when there is no vocabulary in the real life. And that's exactly how I approached my research. So I took an action research approach where my research was shaped through close collaboration with not-for-profit organizations and grassroots practitioners committed to women's health and well-being and empowerment. As a foundational step, what I did is I got a training as menstrual educator, and I led educational workshops with adolescents and adults across genders and immersed myself in the community initiatives. This approach not only guided the trajectory of my research, it also allowed me to reciprocate by sharing my research learnings to shape grassroots efforts. I co-developed menstrual literacy modules, helped structure awareness workshops, and contributed research insights into policy discussions, both at state and national levels back in India. And this is where I feel truly the core and heart of my research work belongs, which is, again, most of it is invisible from my research papers and publication, slightly visible in my dissertation writing. So overall, because we are talking, the focus of this workshop is more on methods and how to design these experiments or the studies. I conducted overall many hours of interviews, 123 plus interviews, which led to 163 hours of audio data. I collected more than 2,500 survey responses, multiple design workshops, focus groups, expert workshops. And this rich data set, along with the field notes, photographs, and participant materials, was later analyzed using critical theoretical frameworks from gender studies to synthesize socio-technical recommendations toward nurturing period-positive futures. But before I move forward, it is really, really crucial for me to acknowledge my positionality as a cis woman born and brought up in Delhi, India, and how my own experiences around menstruation has undeniably shaped how I have designed my study, how I have collected data, the kind of vocabulary I have used in the field, ultimately shaping the analysis which are presented across multiple papers. Having seen women being marginalized repeatedly on various counts due to lack of information, leakiness of their menstrual bodies, stain on their clothes, social stigma around menstruation, I strongly and deeply feel that facilitating an open communication on this topic is really, really vital. And what I could do in my own capacity, given my position as a researcher, I took an emancipatory action research approach and adopted feminist standpoint to conduct all my data analysis and data collection. And when I was doing all of that, I was deeply, deeply inspired by this particular quote. If you have come here to help me, you're wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let's work together. I want to emphasize that I'm HCI researcher. I work with technologies. I'm really interested in designing technologies. That's my bread and butter. But my research is not just about digital technologies. It's about care. It's about equity. It's about reimagining what's possible when we use technology as a means, both as good and worst. And above all, it's also about committing to the long, patient, and deeply humane work of transformation. I specifically added this particular segment for this talk because we were talking about methods. And I would like to take a moment to reflect, what this commitment truly demands when you do fieldwork on a taboo topic in a messiness of real world. To begin with, undertaking this research journey entailed nurturing a safe space, one built on invisible care work of the team, including my advisors, collaborators, field partners, and me. It also meant practicing listening and tolerance, respecting our diverse experiences, being mindful of how stigma could shape our conversations, and slowly peeling away the discomfort to build the trust. It also demanded turning inwards for me, particularly who was body shamed, was not comfortable in her own body, was not ready to accept leakiness of my own body and bodily fluid. So, facing the discomfort in my own body, questioning internalized values, and staying open to learning and unlearning. What worked was creating time to heal and process. Through reflection journals, taking breaks, and simply allowing space for emotions to surface. There were times when we would just cancel the meetings. There were times when I would come back crying from the field and spend hours with my team debriefing what has gone wrong and how can we support each other and take the next step forward. It also entailed confronting deeply vulnerable situations. Listening to stories of emotional, sexual, and systemic violence and holding that pain with care was central to this whole journey. It meant preparing rigorously, and I mean really, really rigorously, understanding the laws of the land, practicing ethical management and engagement, and working closely with the community intermediaries to navigate sensitive terrains with respect and accountability. On some days, it also meant standing firm when my own boundaries were crossed. In the field, speaking openly about vaginas, sexual health, and menstruation across genders made me subject to character assassination. I was labeled as available simply for daring to break the silence. These painful moments laid bare the very stigma this work seeks to uproot and challenge. These were difficult experiences. Still makes me feel uncomfortable when I think of them. But rather than deterring me, they deepened my commitment to continue working towards the freedom of our own bodies, our voices, and our stories. Through it all, what carried me forward was care. Care for myself, for each other, and for generations of menstruators yet to come. And I want to take this moment to say, with all the strength in my body, that undertaking research on any taboo topic in a sensitive context is messy, emotional, painful, slow, frustrating. But it is also powerful, beautiful, and absolutely necessary. To everyone out there doing their work every single day, breaking silences, holding spaces, pushing for change, I see you, I honor your courage, and I stand with you in applause, in solidarity, in hope. Because to carve out just futures for all is just not about designing better technologies or better interventions. It is equally about keep showing up again and again until we collectively realize equitable futures for all. And this is the work which is rarely discussed, talked about. This is what I call behind the scenes, which I feel needs to be celebrated even more than the results presented in the paper because it's not easy job to be done. So after talking about all the invisible behind the scenes of research, let me just quickly jump to the most visible part of any research, which is the learnings or takeaways. So I will not be going into the details of each of my studies, but in a nutshell, I can tell you what I have learned through my research experiences. My research reveals that menstruation is not just an intimate bodily experience. It's a social journey navigated within communities, spoken in silences, and shared by those around us. In this landscape, in this messiness and in this landscape, menstruators are engaging with contemporary menstrual technologies, not just as users, not just to make sense of their body, but as a means to reclaim agency and practicing bodily integrity and autonomy, all while doing all of this while coexisting with deep-rooted cultural boundaries. I'll give you two examples. Like quickly, I'll explain you. So one of my studies that focused on menstrual tracking in India, um, I was inspired to unpack menstrual tracking practices in India, given a lot of work which was coming and being published in HCI on menstrual trackings from Global West. Because throughout my experiences, my participants rarely talked about tracking. It is not that prevalent in India. So I was curious, like, why is it not? There are many, many, many menstrual trackers available on Apple uh, and Google Store. But why people are not using it, or how they are using it, or why they are even talking about it or not talking about it. And what I realized that menstrual tracking was just not about making sense of their bodies. It was not just about their health. It was about something very deep. It was about their agencies around their bodies. If there is a adult menstruator who's sexually active and is not married and lives in a joint family, and they want to practice bodily autonomy, then menstrual tracking helps them to coexist. Um, these menstrual trackers would then, in another situation where a menstruator is divorced and remarried, wants to ensure that their second marriage is fruitful, they use these menstrual trackers for conceiving. And if these trackers fail, their marriage fail. So it's not about the bodies, just the bodies and the health. It is beyond that. It's about their existence. It's about their respect. It's about their dignity. I'll now turn to a less serious example. And before I go forward, I want to tell you something about the context in India. In India, still gender binaries are super prevalent. Other genders or third gender are still debatable. So my participants eventually fell on using terms like boy and girl, men and women. But I understand that not all women are menstruators and not all menstruators identify as women. So in the scenario which I'm going to explain, I'm just gonna pick what is the reality of my context without trying to be politically correct. So please just bear with me. Imagine a 12-year-old girl in a tier 2 city in India. She has just gotten her first period. She doesn't even have a name for what is happening to her. At home, no one talks about it. At school, she'll learn about menstruation, maybe later at 15 years of age in a separate girls only session while the boys stay back in the class. So what will she do? She turns to the only place she can, and that's the internet. She searches, finds a period tracking app, and the application assumes she is a married woman trying to conceive. So, what failed her? Was it the application, her school, her family, the cultural norms that discourage open conversation about menstruation, or a curriculum that teaches menstruation too late? The answer, of course, is all of the above. And that is the problem uh, I wanted to tackle. And I'm trying to tackle actually. Just translating this problem to the community of interaction designers or technology developers, when we design menstrual technologies, we often tend to focus on the individual. We zoom in on the user and their phone or the device, let's say, whichever that device could be given the advancement of technology. And there is real important and critical work that needs to be done there. And I don't deny that. But while designing, we often struggle to make sense of and account for the bigger picture, which I just explained, the messiness of living ecology that is surrounding web of family, culture, institution, and policies that shape whether someone can even pick up their phone to use the technology in the first place. And I want to emphasize that I'm using the term living ecology, and it's a conscious choice. Like most of you might be thinking, ecologies are already living. Why are you talking about living ecologies? Because so I'm also in past life I was a trained computer engineer, and I have also developed many applications for assignment and whatnot. But when we go and try to find requirements from the field, what does user want, we come back and we try to translate it and develop application. And that takes time. That happens over a period of time, at least 6 months or 3 months or 2 months, right? Assuming we are not using large language models for development. So what happens is that even with during that time of 2 months, this ecology has shifted. We work with a snapshot of what is the user requirement, what are the realities, and we start developing. And by the time we try to go back and deploy them, the realities have shifted entirely. So that's why I say we are talking about living ecologies. We are not designing for, but in these ecologies. So, and this question has cost me many sleepless nights in past 2 years. How can we design for, no, not for, in living ecologies, in their messiness, which can also be reframed, like how does one actually take an ecological perspective in practice? What does that look like on Wednesday evening when we are trying to make a design decision? And to find answer to this question, I turn to existing theories, and I turn to specifically ecological systems theory, which is a development theory by Uri Bronfenbrenner. And he spent like 3 decades of his life trying to develop this theory. This theory basically says that how a child develops from child to an adult life is just not dependent on genetics. It's dependent on many different layers of influences, which he has mapped in these concentric circles. And each layer is composed of actors, objects, and symbols. And I'll give you a second to read what's written on the slide. Okay, so this is not a distant concept, right? Okay, these are, you might be thinking, oh, these are concentric layers of circles. It's on a slide. That's good. We are all embedded in these layers, and we are carrying these layers with us as we speak. As you are sitting in these rooms, you are, imagine yourself with concentric circles surrounding you, because that's the reality. They are invisible, but we always carry them with us. We cannot take ourselves out of this. Even we as researcher, when we are going and studying communities or taking interviews, we are carrying our own circles with us. So lately, because I'm a HCI researcher, interaction designer, I speak to that community. And within my community, researchers have been using this, specifically in the health domain. They have been actively engaging with this theory, but they have been using it as an analytical lens to unpack and describe who the actors are and what are their influences within a system. But we stop there. We rarely take the next step. We don't use its generative potential. We don't use it to design. And I personally, like when I was doing my PhD and I came across this concept, I felt like there is something in this theory which we as a community can use. But I was not pretty sure like how to translate it and what could that look like, whether that makes sense or not. But today I can say it does make sense. I spent last 2 years of my life trying to do that. So what I did is like I translated this theory for menstrual health and well-being by grounding it in literature with the aim of harnessing its generative potential. And rather than producing any other ready-to-use framework, which I was super tempted to do because I'm an engineer, I was engineer, but the problem was that it would risk flattening the diversity of menstrual experiences across bodies and context. And I'll be honest, like I spent good like 4 months of my life trying to come up with a plug and play framework. Like, okay, this is a framework, go design menstrual technologies. And this was me after defending my PhD, after doing 8 years of field work. And then in one sudden moment, I was like, what am I doing? I am basically contradicting my body of research and all the people who have been advocating that menstruation is messy, the bodies are different, these are diverse experiences. How can we make a plug and play framework for something which is so diverse to even be defined in one single sentence? So I threw that idea into the trash bin, and then started digging up literature from design epistemologies. And there I stumbled upon the concept of intermediate knowledge, which says that, when you do make designs, when you try to make design theory by doing things, by making things, you can end up finding certain concepts, strong concepts, which are the backbone, but cannot be generalized. But they can be adapted based on what your objective and goal is. Like, for example, in simple languages, if I ask you to make a chair, the chair will have legs, it will have a seat, it will have a backrest. But that could look different, right? Depending on context, depending on purpose of use. But it will have more or less legs, sitting chair, and a backrest. So that's what I was trying to do when I was trying to translate this ecological systems theory for my objective. So the outcome, it is not a theory, it is not a rigid template, and it's a scaffold. And you will be engaging with this in the activity session. This is what it looks like. So my translational research resulted into what I call as like socio-ecological canvas. It's a socio-ecological canvas. It's not environmental. It's socio-ecological canvas. I want to really, really emphasize this. And it's a low fidelity visual template, something you could literally print on A3 paper. And it is structured around 6 layers of influence on a menstruating individual. And I'll quickly explain them. So I don't know whether the text is visible or not. I hope it is. The outermost layer is socio-cultural political blanket, which includes gender norms, menstrual taboos, policy, etc. As we move inward, there are indirect but shaping systems or organizations like government, ministries, femtech companies, NGOs, ourselves as researchers and designers, which play a critical role and influence the menstrual experiences of various menstruators. And then as we move more towards another layer, then there is immediate environment such as home, school, workplace, and healthcare, where the menstruator interact and spend most of their time. Along with the interactions and tensions between these different systems at these intimate spaces. For example, just imagine an adolescent girl, which I was talking about in the scenario. Just imagine if she is being taught at school that menstruation is normal bodily experience, and at home she is conditioned to hide it, to not disclose it, to not talk about it, and pretend that it is something very shameful. So these are conflicting interaction which leaves the menstruator confused, right? And finally, there was a layer which was not in the original theory, but which is super, super critical for our context, is that of understanding one's own soma, to capture the influence of individuals' relationship with their menstruating body. So what if a person doesn't have a positive body association, and then we are trying to design a technology which assumes the user has a positive association, and everything is going well with them? That technology will not work well in terms of adoption and scalability. So we need to also account for where the user is in terms of their relationship with their bodies, influences from their immediate environment, what are the policy constraints, what is happening in terms of menstrual access to menstrual products, and many things. Finally, I know this is very overwhelming, but beyond this, there is also a dimension of time. And that dimension of time is also not just single dimension of time. It is also, there are two clocks. One is personal timeline of transitions and choices, and a global timeline, which includes account for events like pandemic, political shifts, and social movements that continuously shape what is happening in these 6 layers. And I'll give you a second to process whatever I was speaking, because it is super overwhelming. Okay, so what I have done is you don't have just the canvas. For each layer, which I have just explained, I have also curated a list of plausible values for actors, objects, and symbols which are grounded in the literature. And I call them building blocks for developing the canvas. Think of these more or less like a Lego pieces, and as researchers, designers, we can use them as it is. We can adapt them, replace them, discard them, append them when you're building your own canvas for your own context. Because menstrual experiences are super subjective, contextually grounded, that one fit for all solution doesn't exist, right? That's why I dropped the idea of making a plug and play framework in the first place. Okay, what is the purpose of this canvas? It's a visualization of the broader ecology of your research context. And we have also developed a set of generative prompts to help you actually work and develop this canvas. For instance, if you see this particular example prompt on the screen, it asks you to pause and deliberate on the elements in your study ecology that are shaping the issue. Which ones are sustaining the very issue you're trying to address, and which one resist it, and which sits somewhere in between. And you'll know more about this in the next session. This is just for you to get a sense of like what this is all about. So to conclude, the canvas in its current setup is a visual template. It also includes written examples that serve as its building blocks and set of generative prompts to guide users through the building process. And this was also refined through expert workshops. We invited 10 experts in feminist technologies to engage with the canvas in reflective workshops. We asked our experts to visit one of their past projects, and what we found was striking. Participants didn't just map their ecologies, they questioned them. Anna said using the canvas felt like an activist methodology. Where do we want to intervene? Which layer do we want to intervene? Do we want to focus on just one or more? Then it seems almost like an activist methodology, because it's really like where can we hit the hardest to affect the most. Christina noted how it helped them surface racism, not as this big gigantic concept, but nudged them to view it as something they could locate in specific layers. The kind of zooming in and zooming out movement became one of the most significant affordances of the canvas. At the same time, participants also found it uncomfortable, but in productive ways. Seeing the full ecology of a project can be humbling. As Nadia potentially pointed out, it could make you question your overall approach. As she says that it made her feel like, I am making a small prototype. What am I doing to address this big social problem? It was interesting to see that the group collectively reflected that this discomfort is the point. You're not expected to fix everything, but you should definitely understand the terrain you are working with. What's going to work? The action you take, how it's going to ripple across. Is it going to have an impact now or in 10 years? So it helps you to think through those critical tensions which might not exist even now in the world, but may exist like 10 years down the line. So what is Canvas finally? It's a shared vocabulary. It's a collaboration tool for interdisciplinary teams. It's a pedagogical tool for students to learn and to think critically about design and design choices. It's a way to critique existing systems, anticipate unintended consequences, and design for futures that don't exist yet. It is not a checklist, and I want to really, really emphasize this. It is not a deliverable. You don't have to approach it as a task that needs to be completed. It's a conversation starter, one that asks you to stop, zoom out, and ask, whose ecology am I designing for? And how does my intervention change it? I think this intervention or this tool is super timely, because we are at a moment when the socio-political cultural fabric surrounding menstruating bodies is actively shifting in ways that are real, consequential, and affect not only the communities we work with, but also ourselves as researchers. And my canvas is a small step towards offering a vocabulary to our community to make sense of these vulnerabilities, to navigate messy, overwhelming ecological complexities. I have made it print and play. Take a printout, fill it, break it, rebuild it, throw it in a dustbin. but I invite you to join in extending it within and beyond the scope of sexual and reproductive health. Thank you. And I've spoken a lot. Thank you so much.
So much, Anupriya. We would now have time for some questions.
Do you want me to stop my screen sharing? Or I can just...
It's okay. We will have a break of the sessions after your presentation, after the questions, sorry. Are there any questions?
Thanks a lot for the interesting presentation, also in sharing your personal experiences. I think that was very powerful. My first question would be, where can we download this canvas?
Sorry, can you please repeat it?
Where can we download this canvas?
Okay. Yeah. So it's in my paper, and maybe Marina can share the link, but you will be engaging with it in next 15 minutes.
Perfect. And my second question would be, showing these data, in what experience and what's the highest data you can actually make a difference?
Oh, that's a good question. And I would say, let me just open that, right? So that would be easier. Yes, that depends what you want to do and what you want to achieve. Every layer is important. I can't pick and choose one. It depends on what you're trying to do. For example, if you're trying to design a menstrual tracker, let's talk about that. Then what is your objective with that? Do you want to empower users to make sense of their bodies? And that also depends on the context. Or do you want to help them practice their bodily autonomy? And that will entirely depend how you position it. So the tracker will exist in the somatic layer, but how the data is collected, in which form the data is collected, what vocabulary you are using, what is highly dependent on the policies at like second last layer, and also socio-cultural fabric. Like if you are in a certain culture where it's not like you have certain specific practices around menstruation, then you also have to be cautious about like how that interaction is designed with the user. So what I'm trying to tell you is I cannot pick one, because it doesn't matter where you drop your intervention. It is definitely going to create a ripple and a change across all the dimensions. It's just about being cautious of what kind of change you want to nurture and what it could lead to in terms of safety and vulnerability of your user if you are working in a stigmatized context.
Thanks a lot for the answer. And also greetings from Kate. She is my PhD supervisor, and she started this question today. But she knows she also went to the same university, UZH.
Oh, great.
Yeah, that was a really nice, interesting talk. So I had a question on, have you used this framework for developing an actual intervention yet? And you did say for your PhD, you develop a menstrual tracker in India. So are these two connected or are these two separate things? And I just was curious about.
Yeah. So I did not develop anything. Let me be very clear. I did not develop anything. I studied. Look, even to develop anything, I need to do step 0 of understanding what is happening at the grassroots, given so many trackers and so many platforms were already there. So I spent my energy in understanding what is working and what is not working. That's all I did. There is no, if you ask my opinion, there is no decent menstrual tracking intervention. And I'll not say a tracker, digital tracker. I'm talking about menstrual tracking intervention, because based on my experience, only digital intervention is going to fail in India. You need to design a socio-ecological or socio-technical intervention. That's a thing. Coming back and answering to your first question, which was like, have I used this framework to design anything? Um, no, but this framework is rooted in my 10 years of grassroots experience. So I'll tell you. Just give me a second. I'll load that slide. Yeah. So the methodological approach which I took, I have expertise around menstruation and the challenges of menstruation in Indian context. And I can only talk about that. And I cannot do justice if I talk about menstruation at global level. So that's what I did. I went back and built on my own experience as menstrual health educator within the field. I looked up existing papers which were published on menstruation in Indian context. I picked them up and analyzed them to draw this framework. And then I complemented this with existing international white reports by United Nations and World Health Organizations and UNICEF to see whatever I was putting in these building blocks, does that align or not? Because my objective was not to make a plug and play thing. My objective was to give a starting point. So whatever I have put here are building blocks. These are common. These might make sense in certain contexts. These might not make sense in other contexts. So that's the approach I have taken. So this is not just theoretical. This is not just grounded in theory. It is grounded in my 10 years of fieldwork experience. I have not used it to design a technology. I might do in coming years, but I have tried using this framework as a pedagogical tool in an interaction design course here at KTH. And what I did is I removed the dependence on menstrual health and well-being. I just gave my students the canvas and the prompts, and I asked them to think of the technology for which they were going to write an interaction critique and think of that using these prompts and this canvas, and it worked. And I did it only in one class, but it was generative. They could identify tensions and they could identify things which they were not thinking of initially, but this interaction or this engagement made that visible to them.
That makes a lot of sense. Because I mean, I have developed something in the Indian context and I can talk to you about it later. But
Yeah.
incidentally, but the thing, Indian context itself is huge. Like you were saying,
Yeah.
a grassroots level, but Indian context is again, you could talk at different levels and different contexts, and this whole framework would change. And today we were talking to somebody from Africa, and she was telling how her context on certain things that we are developed will completely change in her context in Nigeria. And how if we need to, like you said, plug and play in her context, but make a few changes and make it relevant to her context, how it will change. And maybe a framework like this would help us take one thing and put it in a different context and make sure we make the relevant changes in the other context.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I didn't think of my canvas like that, but that sounds logical to me, and that's new application of that. This can help in translating and identifying what needs to be translated for or tailored for particular context. And I completely agree with you that in India, with every like 100 kilometer, the context changes. And I have predominantly worked in urban Indian context, but as menstrual educator, I have worked in peri-urban Indian context also. So yeah, that was the whole point, that I did not want to make a finalized, very beautiful framework. This is just if you are familiar, if you're comfortable in Hindi, what I'm trying to do is, this is just the नींव, right? जब हम बिल्डिंग बनाते हैं तो उसके लिए जो नींव रखी जाती है, ये वो है. I can't see you, so I don't know whether you understood what I was saying.
The foundation, sort of.
Yeah. So so it's the foundation. Thank you. Sometimes I really want to express myself in Hindi and not use English words, but yeah.
I'm from South of India, but I understand.
Yeah.
I was asking, so I can understand. That's the foundation.
Yeah.
Good. Another question?
have a question more regarding the first part of your talk when you explained all the aspects that matter to you more in the process of research and also as a researcher and as a human. And I found it very interesting how you mentioned the importance also of like active emotions or experience processing within as a part of the design work and your interactions with supervisors or colleagues, for example. And for me, like coming from an engineering background also, I have experienced that often in those engineering environments, at least here in Switzerland, this is not at all a part, or this is more something that you try to eliminate, or you would consider if you're a strong person and a strong engineer if you control your emotions and you don't talk about them and you. It's maybe a bit extreme to say it like this, but like or that you're not resilient if you need to.
No. I would.
A lot about your emotions.
Yeah, I would do, because I'll tell you, I joined my PhD in an engineering department. It is Triple IT Delhi in the Presta Institute of Information and Technology. There was no design department when I started. I was registered in computer science. People were interested in making, at that time, IoT, Internet of Things was at boom. People wanted to make those sensors, talk about algorithms and whatnot. It was not easy for me. My research was not valued. My peers, forget about people who are senior to me or professors, my colleagues, they would look down on me and say, this is not computer science research. What are you doing? It's fine. It's a social science research. It was not easy. I have cried a lot, but actually now when I look back and think what worked for me in that moment was like, I'm a super emotional person and I'm not ashamed of it. It was not easy. I took a lot of initiatives. And there was a lot of collective effort by both of my advisors to ensure that I feel safe in terms of expressing my emotions. And it was equally difficult for them because they also come from certain conditioning. So one of my advisor is cis men, another is cis women. So it was not easy. I'll be very honest. There were uncomfortable conversations. I did not know where are those boundaries. We had to cautiously work to draw them. And there were a lot of times where I relied on therapy, counseling. Sometimes these field experiences leave you angered, frustrated, and helpless. And you need support system. You cannot do this alone. So I found what worked for me. And if somebody in that kind of setting wants to do this kind of work, my first recommendation would be, start with building that support network first, because you would need it. And even today, like, it's been some time that I did field work in India, but I still remember some of very disheartening stories, and it affects me even today. So it's not easy. And if you think that you are not ready, then it's okay to not do it. That's equally okay. You know what? There's one thing which I have recently, like, after my PhD, I have started giving a lot of thought about is like, we talk a lot about participant well-being, participant care, participants should feel safe, participants should feel protected. Yes, that's really, really important. That's really, really critical. Why don't we ask questions about like, I should feel safe, I should feel protected, I should be allowed to cry, I need therapy, I need support. I don't think so. As researchers, we ask, we just take ourselves for granted. And I think that's problematic. It's high time we should start talking about those things. I don't know whether I answered your question or not. I just, yeah.
How would you, or explain, let's say a supervisor or somebody from your environment, the value of this active emotional processing? I absolutely agree that it's very important.
Yeah.
I find it sometimes difficult to explain it to people who have zero understanding.
You know, the way is like you can talk about them. You can try to schedule a meeting. I'll be very professional and tell you the step-by-step thing. First, take a moment to process what you are feeling. You need to have a clarity of like what's happening with you. Is it something you are feeling? Is it something you are being triggered? Is it something workplace situation? What is it? Then you have to make a cautious decision whether with whom you want to, the person who's in position of power, and you're going to have a conversation with them. Do you share that comfort level or not? Depending on your comfort level, you should, I would think, like sit and give some time to mark some bullet points what you want to talk about. And then you should schedule a meeting and give heads up to the other person that you're going to talk about this topic, because it is also equally emotionally challenging for them. Whether they are capable of understanding it or not is a secondary question, but you also need to be conscious that it might be emotionally impacting them. So just give a heads up briefly and see how they respond. You'll get some sense of that, right? And then go to the meeting. I think could be in the office. That meeting also could be a walk, right? When people walk, then it's easy, right? The space also matters when you're having that conversation. And then try to have a conversation based on your comfort. If you feel that the other person was able to understand 0.001% of what you're saying, I think that's a win in engineering department where people don't understand this. And then you'll have to take baby steps and figure out what works for the team or for both of you. But if in the first meeting you feel that that's not a safe space for you, then I would say then start drawing strong boundaries. If you go and do certain kind of work and you feel overwhelmed and you feel the other person is not going to understand, you can always say, I'm not feeling well. I need time out. This is where I draw boundaries. I think people understand boundaries, at least in Europe, not in India. So you can use that, right? Like find the hacks, find the things which work for you, but prioritize your well-being also. You don't have to make yourself suffer. And if you're not ready, it's completely okay that I'm not ready to do this. And and that's something which is coming from my own experience. So for the first year of my PhD, I was working with survivors of schizophrenia in a hospital setting, in inpatient ward. And after like 1 year of doing field work there, I witnessed some really horrific situations there. And I came crying back. I ran into my advisor's office, and I think that was the first time I actually was howling and crying. And I was like, I cannot do this. I want to do it. I cannot do this. I don't have emotional bandwidth to do this because it is affecting me. And I said, no, I can't. And then the project kept happening, but I withdrew myself from there to protect myself. And you have that agency. Nothing is, okay, then I will be contradicting my own thing. But you have to find a balance between what you can offer and the activism you want to do. You can't do both. There's no point of doing activism for a short period of time and sacrificing yourself. It's a persistent and consistent approach. If you burn out in the beginning, then it will be the loss for the people for whom you are working, like in terms of activism, if that makes sense. I don't know.
Thank you very much.
Yes. So I think we're going to do one last question by Davini.
Yes. Thank you so much, Anupriya, for a very great and inspiring talk. And regarding stigma, we know that stigma is shaped collectively, right? By menstruating and also people. So my question is like, to what extent can we apply or implement your Canva to address stigma with non-menstruating individuals, such as male and
Can you please re-articulate it, because your voice was actually breaking, so I couldn't understand completely, but I think I know what you're trying to ask, but I just want to be double sure I have understood it correctly.
Yes. So my question is, to what extent can we implement your Canva to address or to break stigma by non-menstruating individuals? Because we know that that stigma is also collectively shaped by many different people, behavioral archetypes, and so on.
Yeah. So if you look at this canvas, the non-menstruating people are also part of it, right? They are part of this second layer, immediate environment. They're also part of interaction among immediate environment. They're also part of other communities and systems, and they're also part of socio-ecological political fabric. So even if you're trying to, let's say, design awareness application, let's talk about that. Awareness application on sexual and reproductive health across gender, right? And menstrual health is a part of that. And if you want to do that, then the person who's at the center, like the user or menstruating individual, we can replace, and we can have multiple version of these canvas. One could be menstruating individual, one could be non-menstruating individual, and how the same application, right? Because it's across genders and multiple genders also, like different version of canvas for different genders. And then we can see if we place the same application, right, with an agenda of breaking the silence or advocating for open conversation on sexual and reproductive health, what would that mean for these different genders? At what level? And then if we bring all of these different versions together and look at it collectively, we'll be able to, like, I have a good hunch, we'll be able to highlight certain tension points. So it can be used. That's the whole point, right? It's an ecology. It's just about like who you are putting at the center and who you are putting in the other layers as your secondary stakeholder or secondary user, and what kind of dialogue happens when that, if you're focusing on that particular relationship. For example, if you think about, if you put menstruating individual at the center and their partner in the first layer, so their relationship is definitely gonna be shaped and influenced by that kind of sexual and reproductive application, and vice versa. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you. Okay, cool.
Okay, I would say let's clap very loudly so that Anupriya can hear. For taking the time, even though you had your medical emergency, to still show up for this community, to do this amazing talk. Also, a big thanks again to Blue to present. We have a little something for you here, Blue. Unfortunately, we cannot give it to you. So thanks a lot to both of you.